In this video, we're going to look at how we take Cornell notes for our science class. Your instructor may provide a blank template like this one here for you to fill in. If that's the case, you have three options for completing this assignment. The first one that I'm going to recommend you do is you can type your notes right into this Google Doc. Another option would be to print out the blank template and to handwrite your notes. Although when you do that, the formatting on the page won't be updated, and so you may run out of room and not have enough space for your notes. A third option would be if you have a tablet, you can convert your document to a PDF and you can use the stylus to write on your tablet screen and fill in your Cornell Note section that way. In any case, we're going to fill in the top section with a heading, and you can see I've already started to fill in my heading. I've included my name and my class name and the date on the top right. I've put the topic on these notes, and you can see from this assignment my instructor provided the essential question: how are the elements arranged on the periodic table? So I'm going to type that into my Cornell notes here. And that brings me to the next section. For these notes, we've been assigned a reading in STEM scopes, and we're supposed to read this section on the organization of the elements, as well as the next section on the periodic table, and take our own notes on this Cornell Note template. Taking Cornell notes is a lot like taking any other notes. You'll just notice there are a couple additional sections for us to fill in. On the left side, there's a section that's entitled Questions and Cues, and we will add those after we take notes. And at the bottom, there's a section for a summary of this whole section. We're going to attempt to kind of capture the main idea in this note section in a paragraph or less at the bottom of our notes in the summary. But the majority of our notes will go right in this section here and will look just like traditional notes. So as I'm reading through this section on the organization of the elements, I notice the first section is about someone named Dmitri Mendeleev. It says, as atoms of elements were being studied in the late 19th century, several scientists were looking for a way to organize the elements, to keep track of known elements and add new ones as they were discovered. The person giving credit for developing this organization was a scientist and teacher named Dmitri Mendeleev. In 1869, he began by writing the physical and chemical properties of each element on a card. When he organized them by atomic mass, he began to see a pattern. Certain characteristics occurred periodically or in a predictable manner. As he continued to place the 60 elements that were known at the time, he realized there were some open spaces on the table, and predicted elements would be discovered that would fill those spots. And on it goes, describing what Mendeleev did. So it sounds like this guy was pretty important. I'm going to start my notes section by writing a little bit about Dmitri Mendeleev. And I'm going to do that using the bullets function on my Google Notes here, and just write down a couple short bullets, such as, looks like he arranged the elements based on their atomic mass and their properties. Remember, in science, when we say properties, we're talking about their characteristics, their descriptions. Also, in that reading, I saw that he noticed a repeating pattern. In those properties. Something else that kind of stood out to me is that he had spaces in his periodic table, left open spaces in his organization. All right, if there are other things that stand out to you that seem kind of important, you'll write those down. But notice the way I did this. I attempted to write just short bullets of information without being too wordy, but enough to capture the main idea. This is how you'll continue to take notes as you do your reading, looking for highlights of the most important thing. And of course, most of the time you'll need to read it once through and then go back and find those highlights and jot them into your notes section. When you finish reading, when you finish taking notes on this, I recommend that you wait, give it a little bit of time and let your notes sit, and then come back to them and reread them and see what they look like to you the second time. As I'm reading this, I'm going to fill in the cues or the question section over on the left. So the cues or the questions are basically going to be something that you notice in your own notes that you might want to focus on. And there's two ways we can phrase these. The first way is you could ask it as a question. For example, I might write, how did Mendeleev organize the elements on his table? That could be one of my questions. Now this question is for me. As I'm going back and reviewing my notes, I'm highlighting something that I thought maybe I should know for a test or maybe should stand out from this section. How did Mendeleev organize his elements on the table? Well, the answer should appear right next to this question. So try to organize your question so that the answer is nearby. So as I'm reviewing my notes, if I cover up this note section and just read my question, I can test myself and see if I know the answer. If I don't, I can uncover the notes and find the answer next to it. So one way you can do this is by writing out what we call questions in this section. The other way you can do this is you can write cues, just little prompts that you can put in this section of things that are important or that stand out to you, or maybe connections that you can make. So maybe you learned earlier what atomic mass was in your reading in the last section. So you can make a little cue over here that says atomic mass is the number of protons. No, that's not true. Atomic mass is the average mass of an element. Okay, or maybe you want to review what properties were. They talk about chemical and physical properties, so you could put something like this. There are two types of properties. Notice that the cues or the questions may be prompted by our notes, but we're not rewriting our notes over in this section. Typically, the question or cue section should be completed later on. If you were sitting in a class, you might take all of your notes over on the right-hand side in the notes section, and then later that night as you're reviewing your notes, there's a spot for you to add new thoughts, new ideas in the left section. All right, the last section will be a summary, and since we haven't completed the notes, this is going to be a little harder to do, but the summary will encompass all of the material up in the notes, but we will attempt to kind of summarize this and capture the main idea down in a paragraph. It's always good to look at your essential question and make sure that that's addressed in your summary. So if we continued on, we would notice that this periodic table, there's more to it than just atoms that are arranged by atomic mass. In fact, the reading reveals that later on a scientist named Moseley discovered that the periodic table actually is arranged by atomic number, not atomic mass, and that in this arrangement the number of valence electrons in each shell come into play. So as I continue my notes and I read about these things, I'm going to want to make sure they're part of my summary too. So just a quick overview of how you're going to do your Cornell notes this year in your science class. Again, the main idea is that we still take notes the way you've probably done in the past, but now we're adding a few details to your notes in the form of questions or cues on the left-hand side and a summary at the bottom. Good luck with your Cornell notes, and I hope you learned something as you're taking notes in science this year.